I have kept the ledgers at Greyreed Crossing for going on 22 years now, and in that time, I have logged every sack, crate, and barrel that came off the barges before the sun cleared the reed banks. I weighed cargo. I stamped tallies. I collected the Ford's toll in coin or kind, and I never once let a shipper walk his goods across without paying what he owed. That is the whole of what I am. A woman with a scale and a stylus, standing between the river and the road, making sure nothing crossed without being counted. My father did the work before me, and his mother before him, and I used to think that was the whole of a life worth having. A fair measure, a steady hand, a ledger that balanced at the end of the day. 10 years ago, on a morning so cold the reeds had frozen white at the waterline, I found something in a grain barge that wasn't grain. The barge had come down from the flooded fields upriver, half its cargo spoiled, sour-smelling and heavy with river water, and I was going through the sacks by lantern light, counting what was salvageable and what would have to be written off, when my hand found something that flinched. I pulled back a fold of wet canvas, and there she was, small, silver-scaled along her collarbones the way the Osteri are, with eyes like wet river stone, curled so tight into the spoiled grain that I'd nearly weighed her as a lost sack of barley and moved on. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked up at me from the dark of the hold, uncertain and still as a held breath. One thin hand closed around a carved bone tally stick that wasn't hers to have. Some barge hand's lucky charm, probably, kept for the shape of it in her fist and nothing else. I should have logged her as found cargo, unclaimed, per the Ford's own ordinance. That's what the ordinance was for. Every crossing keeper on this river had done exactly that, at one time or another, with goods nobody came to claim. I didn't. I wrapped her in my own coat, still warm from my back, and walked her past the scale house before the excise crew came on shift, telling myself it was only until I worked out where she'd come from, whose manifest she belonged on, what upriver village might be missing her. That lie lasted about 4 days, which was how long it took her to stop flinching, when I set a bowl of barley mash in front of her. It lasted about 6 days, which was how long it took her to start following me from stall to stall at dawn market, silent, watchful, learning the weights and measures the way I'd once learned them myself, at somebody else's elbow, in a kitchen that smelled of river fog and lamp oil. I called her Pell, because she liked the sound of it better than anything I could translate from Osteri, and because a name makes a thing harder for a warden to write down as unclaimed. Warden Bracknell came for her on the 9th day. He was excise, thin and correct in his gray coat, buttoned to the throat even in the mild autumn, with a ledger of his own that he loved the way some men love their wives. He'd heard, the way wardens always hear, that I'd taken in cargo I hadn't declared. He stood in my scale house with his boots dry and his hands clean, and he set his own book on my counter, the way another man might set down a weapon, and told me, not unkindly, that an Osteri child found stowed on an undeclared barge was, under the Ford ordinance of the 14th year, goods unclaimed and forfeit to the crossing, to be logged, valued, and sold on to whichever labor broker offered fair coin for indentured hands. He said it the way he'd say the price of grain. He wasn't cruel, he was correct, which in a man like that is worse than cruelty, because there's no arguing with a man who's only doing his sums. I told him she wasn't cargo. He told me the ordinance didn't care what I called her. Cargo was cargo, whatever shape it came in, and the shape didn't change the sum. I have spent 22 years reading that ordinance closer than the men who wrote it, closer than the magistrates who cite it, closer than Bracknell himself, who only knew the parts that served him. I knew, the way you know the weight of a scale in your palm without looking at the beam, that the same 14th year law that let him call her forfeit also carried a clause, older, dustier, written for orphaned apprentices back in the guild years, and never once invoked since, that let any licensed Wainwright of the crossing bind an unclaimed minor as a bonded apprentice, provided the binding was logged and witnessed before any labor broker's claim was formally filed. It was a loophole built for a different century by men who never imagined it would be used to answer a warden's ledger with a ledger of my own. Nobody remembered it because nobody was paid to remember old law. I was paid to remember old law. I filed the binding that same afternoon, in front of the crossing's magistrate, my hand steady on the stylus, while Bracknell stood at the door with his own ledger useless in his hands, watching me write, because a claim filed second is no claim at all, no matter how correct the man holding it. I made Pell my apprentice, Wainwright's bond, 7 years, my name set down against hers on the crossing's oldest book, in the same column where my own name had been set down once, years before, against somebody else's. Bracknell read it twice. Then he closed his ledger, said nothing, and walked back out into the cold, because there was nothing left in his book that outranked mine. That was the whole of the danger. No fleet came for her, no army, no wrath, nothing but a thin man in a gray coat who lost an argument to a clause older than his career, and who never came back to try again. I tell people that story sometimes and they look disappointed, like they wanted more, like there ought to have been shouting, or a chase along the riverbank, or something worth remembering by. There wasn't more. There was a child who needed a name on a page, and a woman who happened to know exactly which page to use, and that was the whole of it, and it was enough. Pell grew up at my elbow the way I'd grown up at someone else's, learning the scale, the stylus, the weight of a fair toll against an unfair one, the particular quiet of a ledger closed properly at the end of a long day. She was quiet the way river stones are quiet, and steady the way they're steady too, wearing smooth under handling instead of breaking under it. She kept the bone tally stick her whole childhood, tucked in whatever pocket she had, though she never told me, and I never asked, whose hand it had first belonged to, or what it had cost that hand to lose it. She left Grey Reed Crossing 8 years into her bond, before it was even finished, to walk the trade roads on her own, the way apprentices do when the lesson's learned before the paper says it should be. I signed the release myself, because a bond that outlasts its purpose is just another kind of cage, and I hadn't taken her in to make her a debt she owed me for the rest of her life. 2 years after that, on a morning as cold as the one I'd found her in, with the reeds white again at the waterline, a young Osteri woman I almost didn't recognize walked into my scale house and set a small weight of silver on my counter, the exact toll, to the last coin, of a barge crossing fee for one passenger, undeclared, one that had never been paid 10 years before. I told her the debt was long since forgiven. I told her I'd never meant to collect it. She told me it wasn't mine to forgive. It was hers to pay. I took the coin, because I understood, finally, standing there with her silver cold in my palm, that she hadn't come back to settle a debt at all. She'd come back to prove, to herself, as much as to me, that whatever the ledger had once said about what she was, forfeit, unclaimed, cargo, she was, and always had been, someone who paid what she owed. I weighed the coin the way I weigh everything, out of habit more than need, and it came out exact, the way I already knew it would. I logged it in the old book, under her own name this time instead of mine, and closed the ledger, and did not open it again that morning. Some entries are finished the moment they're written,